afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre Bartman. Welcome to the Budget Committee this afternoon. I'll be chairing. Today on our agenda, we have the briefing by the Provincial Treasury on the 2022-2023 fourth quarter performance, financial and non-financial information. And we will then also have one set of minutes that we will be adopting, and that will be followed by resolutions and actions. As usual, I will ask members just to introduce themselves, and then I'll hand over to the department just to introduce themselves, and then we will jump straight into the presentation. Colleagues, just a reminder also that the presentation is essentially the summary of the link that you were sent for the quarterly non-financial and financial performance. Thank you so much. Deirdre Bartman, Chair of the committee.
Good morning, Chair. Kayla Murray, member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Chair. It's Derek America.
Afternoon. Are there any other members online? I don't see any other members on my box of participants. Wasim, I just want to check whether you've received any apologies.
I have not received any apologies, Chairperson.
Okay, I've also not received any. HOD Savage, over to you and to your team, and then we can jump straight into the presentation.
Thank you, Chairperson. I believe that Minister Wenger has sent her apologies as well. She's at a MINMEC in her wearing her other hat. My name is David Savage, head official of the Provincial Treasury. We are joined by a combined team of the Department of the Premier and the Provincial Treasury, and I will ask colleagues to introduce themselves quickly, if that's okay with you.
In order, I didn't note the minister's apology because she said she'll join a little bit later as she comes out of MINMEC. And in my mind, that is still in attendance. So apologies, but that is noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Annelies.
Good afternoon to the Budget Committee. I'm Annelies Pick, Public Finance in the Treasury.
Afternoon.
Michelle.
Morning. It is Michelle Nicola, Provincial Government Finance.
Good
afternoon, Committee Chair and Committee. It's Shirley Robinson, Chief Director of Public Policy Services. Thank you.
I think Stephen Kenyon is with us as well.
Good afternoon, Steve Kenyon, Local Government Public Finance.
And then other Treasury officials that I can see online, Tanya Bossa, Sharon van Breda, Peter Peterson. And then I'll hand over to Zinat Ismail.
Good afternoon. I'm Zinat Ismail, Chief Director Strategic Management Information. Thank you, Department of the Premier. And thank you, HOD. I'm handing over to my colleague, Mr. Job Garnett.
Good afternoon, Chair and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity. Job Garnett, Department of the Premier and Provincial Data Office.
Wonderful. You can jump straight into the presentation then, and we'll do questions and answers as usual afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I will hand over quickly to the team. As you know, as we briefed the committee before, we're on a reporting reform journey to try and better integrate the various sources of data that we have on financial and non-financial performance on a quarterly basis. And so you're starting to see some of the results of that, which I'm finding very useful, certainly for myself as well. I think just three key points that this is for what we're reporting on here to the committee is the provisional, the pre-audited outcomes for the year ending the 31st of March. So the committee may have heard in the press and in other forums more updated information on some of the things, particularly the non-financial data we're discussing, but that's outside of the reporting scope. The other point, of course, to make is that the financial analysis is on the basis of the appropriations, the final appropriations as adjusted. So that's the basis of the analysis. But I will hand over to first Annelies Pick, and then I think Leonard Ismail will come in and they'll do the presentation jointly together. Over to you, Annelies.
Thank you, David. Yes, in terms of Tanya, if you can move on to the next slide. You can go. There we go. So as David has also indicated, in terms of the context, it is provisional, unaudited outcome for the financial year. And it's part of continuing the journey as we started out with you on the integration of non-financial and financial performance information. We are then also giving you some indication in terms of some of the socioeconomic trends. And then we've divided the presentation into a part A, a part B, and a part C, where the part A is in terms of really just looking at the socioeconomic trends, as I indicated. Part B is the performance information trends that the Department of the Premier will look at. The financial performance is the Treasury that I will then do for you, and then some of the delivery trends. So we're just going to highlight for each of the department. You will see there's quite a bit of information that we have provided, but we will then look at about 3 highlights that we want to bring to your attention around part C. So we want to go through all the targets as indicated in the presentation. So I hand over to Zenit in terms of to kick us off with the socioeconomic and performance trends.
Thank you. So when one look at the socioeconomic picture through the lens of the Provincial Strategic Implementation Plan, the outcome indicators, there is a system that we use to actually draw the data from. So this pre-audited data, or on job safety and well-being, or in terms of the socioeconomic, when one look at the GDP, or the gross domestic product for the Western Cape Western Cape, one can see that is contracted by 1.4% during the fourth quarter of 2022. The number of people unemployed, or that percentage, have decreased by 2%, which is a positive sign, and the official unemployment rate stood at 22.5%. With that context, one can see that there's a slight growth of 0.3% in quarter 1 of 2023 in that in the GDP. In terms of the unemployment rate, and when one look at the narrow unemployment rate, and looking back to quarter 3, it was 24.5%. Quarter 4, there's a slight reduction, 2% reduction in quarter 4, which is 22.5%. Then in quarter 1 now of our current year, 2023, is 21.6%. So another further 0.9 reduction in the first quarter, and that is some positive signs. While the number of the unemployed has decreased by 2.9%, when quarter 1 of this current year, 2023, it was about 752,000 to 730,000. That is just context. In terms of safety, decrease in violent crime, homicide in Western Cape decreasing by 11.3%. That's year on year from quarter 4. 13 priority areas in the Cape Metro recorded 10.7% decrease in homicides. This accounted for about 44.7% of all homicides in the province, and then 13% decrease in the number of sexual assault presentations of public hospitals compared to the previous year. So when one look at that safety scenario, then one can see that 13 priority areas in the Cape Metro, that 10.7% was a decrease in homicides, right? So which means also a positive sign. And when one look at well-being, in 2022 systemic results, that's in education, have found that the percentage of learners in grade 3 attain acceptable outcomes in reading for meaning is 43.5%, and in mathematics 47.32%. So that is our literacy and our numeracy testing. So youth unemployment rate has decreased by 1.6% quarter on quarter, and that is just a sub-element or disaggregation from the in terms of the unemployment when which I refer to in terms of the jobs. And then 15.2% of children born in government facilities weighted under 2500 grams. And I think here one need to just highlight that the target is actually 16%. So there's also a nice positive scenario and a nice positive trend moving in the well-being space. And there's about 40 outcome indicators as previously communicated in jobs 22, safety 6, and well-being 12. Thank you. Next slide. We want to look at the overall financial year delivery trends for performance indicators. And now one look closer at the institutional performance and one look closer to what we measure through our performance indicators through the lens of our annual performance plans. Then one see overall performance of the province, Western Cape government. There's an overall performance of about 84%. So it means there's about 947 targets that we actually looked at, and 793 of those 947 targets have been achieved. If one break it down and one look back at the quarters, then one see overall performance for quarter 1 is 80%, second quarter 83%, quarter 3 76%, and then quarter 4 77%. When one only look at the departments per se, and then one look at the entities, then one can see that across the 13 departments, we achieved 670 of the 801 targets, which is 84%. One of that 13 departments achieved 100% of all their targets. Partially achieved, there's about 100 targets, that's 12%. And then not achieved 4%, which equals to 31 targets. And if one break that into clusters, then one actually see the government cluster, that's 97%. And one can see quarter on quarter, year on year, that the government cluster is always very close to 100%. The social cluster, 73%, and then the economic cluster, 88%. When one look at the entities achieved 123 out of 146 targets, which is also 80%. 4 out of that 10 public entities achieved 100%, partially achieved about 15 targets, 10%, and not achieve 8 targets, which is 5%. So the public entities clusters, government clusters 94%, social cluster 84%, and the economic cluster 83%. Thank you. And then one just look at just a different view or visual lens of what I've just sketched, and I'm not going to go into detail, but just in a visual representation of the narrative overview that I've given. And here one can see that 8 departments achieve more than or equal to the Western Cape average of 84%. And there one can see the departments and the percentage of achievement. Like you can see Department of Premier, I said one department achieved 100%. The Department of the Premier is 100%, very close to it is Provincial Treasury 95%, and that is also part of the governance cluster. When one look at The 5 departments achieve less than the average of 84%. And those are the departments: education, health, social development, and so forth. Next slide. And then the public entities, 8 public entities achieve more than or equal to, also average of 84%. And then 2 public entities achieve less than the Western Cape on the average of 84%. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we look at the financial performance for the 22-23 financial year, this slide then actually represents in terms of 2 things. Firstly, it's giving you information in terms of looking at the spend of the different votes in terms of the actual spend, and on the left axis you'll see that that is in terms of looking at it within the billions, and then in terms of it's also then giving you in terms of the percentage of the budget spent, and that is then the green line that you will see there is in terms of giving you the percentage spend. But what this graph then also does here is that it actually also shows you then the composition of the breakdown of the budget with the various departments, where you can see almost 80% of the budget, the outliers that you see there in education and health, you can see that they actually taking up in terms of the majority of the budget, and you can then see in terms of the rest of the votes, how they then actually make that up in terms of their different budgets. So it gives you in terms of different views from that perspective. But what this is then also then showing you is the fact of the matter, number one, firstly, is the fact that there is the green line doesn't go above the 100%. So no one has overspent their budget. That's the first thing this is also then saying with the green line. Secondly thing the green line is showing you is the fact that in terms of those that the vote that is spent in terms of let's say the least amount of their budget, but also in terms of from an average spend of comparing all other votes, is the Department of Human Settlements, for where votes are concerned, where departments are concerned. And then also what this is then indicating to you is that education has almost spent its entire budget. So I mean, the fact that they have a 28,165 billion rand budget and they spend 28,128. So it's 99.9%. And really it's almost the entire budget. So that's visually is what the slide is indicating to you. So we have spent 99.3% of our budget in as a province. So when we go in a little bit more detail per department, when you're looking then in the next slide. And this is a bit smaller now. But when we look at this slide in terms of what this is then also then showing you is not only then the actual spend by departments in terms of economic classification, but it's also the outcome per classification. So as I indicated, we spent 99.3% of our budget, meaning there's an underspending of about 580 million rand of our budget, and that is really on par with our spending of last year. Last year, we spent 99.2% of our budget. Also, then where we're looking at underspending, I mentioned that human settlements spent in terms of just about 91% of their budget, which is below the provincial average. And the main reason there is in terms of its grant funding that has been delayed, and that is mainly due to community unrest, and that has then impacted in terms of projects, and therefore projects has either then gone slower than planned, or some of the projects then have come to a halt. Then around the payments for capital assets, there we're also seeing underspending, and that is then in terms of on the infrastructure side. And when we look at the detail on the infrastructure side, you'll see that that is also in terms of within human settlements, there's underspending, but also in terms of health and roads, infrastructure, there's also a bit of underspending where capital payments are concerned. The overspending that we are projecting, and I must indicate this is overspending on economic classification, and therefore it's not leading to any unauthorized expenditure. And this is within education. Education for 22-23 has had real drive in terms of increasing its teachers, the number of teachers that we have in the province, and then also in terms of partly where this is concerned is also in terms of the wage agreement, in terms of the balance between the wage agreement and increasing the headcount within COE has taken them over the budget of COE, but still remained within the overall budget of the Department of Education. So that, as I indicated, it's not unauthorized. Then in terms of some overspending, we've also seen in terms of goods and services in health, and that is in terms of the pressure of goods and services and the nature of goods and services in health, the health sector. As we do know, in terms of especially goods and services in terms of health, is on average about 2% higher than CPI in terms of costing, and that then means that there's always a pressure where goods and services are concerned. But what health does do, especially in our province, is able then to balance that in terms of service delivery, but also then in terms of other kind of the service delivery model on other items where they're actually then able to balance the pressure that they face as a sector where goods and services are concerned. When we're moving forward in terms of looking then at in terms of our driver, because in terms of about 52 to 53% of our budget is made up of compensation of employees. And as we do know, our strategy in compensation employees for this province has always been to manage headcount. That is within our control as a province, and therefore we ask each of the departments to manage that headcount so that they can stay within the ceilings that we have set for each of the departments. So when we look at the headcount, we have an increase. There's a net increase for us at the provincial level of 1,044 more staff. This in the 22-23 financial year compared to the previous financial year. So where are we seeing those increases, that net growth? We're seeing it in education because, as I indicated, education had a real drive in terms of increasing the number of posts. And so, as you can see for them, the education department increased their headcount by 1,771. And I can say to you, of that 1,771, 1,418 are teachers alone. And then the rest of that is mainly in terms of what we call public service posts, but it's not necessarily head office posts. It's more in terms of teacher assistant posts. So those are in terms of assistants for teachers in the classroom. And so that's in terms of where the rest of the increase is for education. Within health now, in terms of, you'll see that there is a reduction of about 670 staff members, and that is mainly in terms of them not renewing the contract post that we had in terms of COVID. That also means that as even though the health is facing some difficulties in terms of the service platform, because they are also looking at backlogs and facing that kind of pressure. And then also the pressure on goods and services, as I previously mentioned. But I mean, they do as a sector, not only our Department of Health, but as a sector, they have to reduce their headcount over time. And that is mainly in terms of those COVID posts that's not continued in terms of from a contract perspective. Then in all the other departments, you can see that there is a reduction. Overall, about 57 headcounts in reduction for all the other departments collectively. And so, as you can see that in terms of the province, I mean, once again, we've been prudent in terms of that we're showing in terms of increasing headcount, really where the services pressure is shown. And then there are others where we did give additional funding for, in terms of, for example, social development. I think the committee will remember when we did the adjustments budget, we did give funding for social services, for social workers. But the nature then also of social development is that they do have about a 10% churn rate as well. So as much as they are taking on more social workers, they're also having in terms of staff leaving. And so you can see that there's a net reduction for social development of about 90 headcount. Where they're concerned. Transport and public works, you'll see there's an increase of 77, and that is mainly really in terms of traffic police and the intake then of those traffic trainees then who then qualify, and they are then taken on board and onto our system in terms of traffic officials. Just going forward in compensation employees, it does mean in terms of as prudent as we are, it also then means in terms of what we're facing in terms of going forward in the new MTEF, that we actually need to make sure that we stay as prudent as possible and that we only allow growth where the service delivery demand is going forward. And then the next slide, another driver for our expenditures on the infrastructure side. And from an infrastructure perspective, you'll see that we have spent 96.8% of our budget. And then you'll also see in terms of the various departments, as I indicated before, human settlements spent about 90% of their budget. And then in terms of health has spent 93%. And then also you'll see then Cape Nature then has spent 92% of its infrastructure budget. And so the main reasons for underspending on the health side, that's mainly driven by in terms of the global logistical network, in terms of delayed delivery, in terms of high technology. So if we reminded that health technology is also forming part of the infrastructure budget for health. And then there's also been delays on a municipal approval side for things like land use management schemes, applications, and then also in terms of from a professional service provider appointments is the appointments of service providers that also has had some delays. There's also been some poor performance by service providers, and then that also impacts the projects. And as then in terms of impacts therefore the financial outcome of the department. Then in terms of the human settlements, I've mentioned this before. So on the human settlement development grant, as well as on the informal settlements upgrading grant, in terms of there's a 212 million rand underspending on those two grants. And in terms of that was mainly in terms of unrest that prevented the contractors to go on site. And then that is delayed in terms of the projects and the rollout of the projects for the rest of the financial year. I can also then mention that we have subsequently applied for rollover, because as these are conditional grants, we've applied for national approval for rollover, and we have received it. So the 212 million has been approved for rollover. And in terms of our rollover rules within this province, that does mean that the Human Settlements Department, or now Infrastructure Department, they're able to go ahead with these projects. They do not have to wait for any administrative approval in terms of further in order to spend. So there's nothing hampering them to go ahead and spend on those projects in the current financial year. Then on Public Works, you'll see that Public Works then has a slight over expenditure. They spent 103% of their budget. Here you can see some of the pressures then on then from a goods and services budget. So for example, cleaning services, we've seen that increase year on year as in terms of being a bit higher than the averages of previous years. And then there's also a higher demand for cleaning services as well. And then also the unforeseen day-to-day maintenance has also then equaled into additional emergency responses, and this is mainly driven by load shedding. So because of load shedding, we have greater breakdown in mechanical breakdowns, and then also increased in diesel requirements in terms of which is higher than what departments and public works have budgeted for. Moving along then in terms of our revenue, and so our own revenue in terms of how we have performed for the province is the fact that we have over-collected revenue in terms of departments. Own revenue have over-collected by about 617 million, mainly within the Department of Health in terms of health patient fees, 170 million. And that's one of the reasons why is also mainly because if you remember when we put this budget together, particularly because we were coming out of COVID, it was also a reduced budget because we did not know in terms of the projection that we would end up with, and therefore we did reduce the projection or the budget for own revenue for health patient fees for health when we put the budget together. So so that's one of the reasons for the 170 million rand over collection. You'll also then see on human settlements that funding that you see there is mainly funding that has been returned by various municipalities in terms of projects where they have not spent their money in previous financial years, and in terms of our Appropriation Act, it indicates that they need to return that money to the fiscus via the Human Settlements Department. And then Transport and Public Works, the over collection you see there, 120 million is in terms of motor vehicle license fees. When we then look at in terms of from a tax perspective, so that is our gambling taxes and then our liquor licenses, there we've over collected by almost about 560 million rand. That's mainly driven by sports betting in terms of the gambling taxes. So when we're looking at our public entities, and I'm finishing off now, in terms of our public entities and how they have performed in the next slide. Public entities is in terms of that you'll see that they've spent about 97% of their budget. And I just need to indicate again that, you know, public entities have a different accounting system than in terms of the departments. So you'll see that in terms of some of the reasons in terms of underspending or even some of the overspending that you'll see there. So in terms of from an overspending perspective, the gambling board is showing in terms of an over expenditure, but this is not in terms of over expenditure from a cash perspective, or they've spent more than what they actually have. It's more in terms of from a accrual perspective. So in terms of its accrual for services in kind, which is non-cash, which is related to rental and utilities that is accounted within the board's administrative program. So it's not necessarily in terms of that they have spent more than the actual cash that they have. Then in terms of Atlantis, that you'll see there as well, that they have overspent in terms of about 5.5 million rand, and that's mainly due to a purchase of a building that they have invested in. But this is offset again against over collection from revenue that they have collected, and therefore when we put expenditure and revenue together from accrual perspective, they would not be showing in terms of from an over expenditure. Just in terms of some of the main underspendings in terms of Westgrow, we've given you some of the reasons there. Is the fact of the matter is, again, in terms of goods and services, it is in terms of making sure that they can take their accruals into account. So it's non-cash accounting items into account. And then also their CFO then also, if we remember and we recall, in the financial year, their CFO, it was vacant, the post, and therefore there were savings on COE. And then in terms of the Liquor Authority, there's also savings there because in terms of their CFO post also became vacant. And also then in terms of underspending within the Liquor Authority is in terms of the challenges in terms of the construction of their client service center. And then that is in transpired into some savings there as well. On Western Cape Nature Conservation, their main underspending is not only on COE, but it's also in terms of delays in procurement which is then led to the integrated catchment management projects, which is also from an infrastructure perspective, was also delayed. And so that then correlates then with the underspending that was shown on the infrastructure slide around Cape Nature Board. So I think that takes care of the financial information. Zenit now, in terms of the next slide, please, Tanya, is going to take you through some of the delivery trends for you. Thank you, Zenit.
Okay, thank you, Annalise. As indicated at the start, we will only do a few highlights. And so the overview of delivery trends is in line with our planned performance, our indicators that we have set, our targets, and obviously then linked to the budget and our resources. So what we have done, Chair, you could see that we've actually aligned it also to the strategic priorities. And I'm only going to highlight a few, and if I just highlight education, then 8 new schools have reached completion, which means the province have actually built 8 new schools over the period. And in line with what Annalise have indicated earlier in terms of the teacher support, 595 learning support teachers at public ordinary schools are employed. And if one look at our national senior certificate and the matric and the results that we have achieved in the previous financial year, it's 17.7% of our grade 12 learners achieve at least one distinction in any of the subjects that they have written, and that is an accomplishment. If one look at the next slide, just look at the Department of Health, and we're just highlighting a few. And here we try to demonstrate what service has actually gone full cycle. So patient safety incident cases closed and finalized at different hospitals across the Western Cape. Then one can see at district hospitals, 98.2%, specialized hospitals, 98%, also central hospitals, 97%, and then tertiary hospitals, close to 100%. Then one look at children, then about 7.7% of children under 1 year, so under 12 months, receive measles, the second dose, and that is the proportion of the 1 year population. So some children may not have received both doses. So we're reporting on those children that actually received both doses of measles vaccinations. So 75% of the TB clients who started drug and tuberculosis treatment have successfully completed that treatment. And that is then a success rate because they have actually done the full cycle. Thank you. Then one look at social development. And as we know, it is the discussion here is very much about adults, children, old age, disability. So we highlight the victims, and 1525 victims of crime and violence accessing victim support services, which the department offers. And when one look at children, then 923 children in conflict with law completed the diversion program to get them out of trouble. And then also in the Department of Social Development, when one look at the older population, then 13119 older persons benefit from the subsidies transferred to community-based care and support services. And then 19428 families again benefited from participating family preservation and support services. So we Here we just kind of show how the Department of Social Development actually delivered the service to different parts of the population. And then one look at human settlements, and also in line with what Annalise have spoken earlier, one can see that about 1,198 beneficiaries benefited through the enhanced extended discount benefit schemes. And in terms of ownership, 331 title deeds transferred to qualifying beneficiaries, and that beneficiaries were there pre-1994 on the housing list. Thank you. And if one look at our youth and our younger people, then 274 young people interested in the construction constructions were trained. One look at the environment in the Department of Environmental Affairs, then 6 completed criminal investigations were handed to the NPA for prosecuting. And 100% waste management licenses were finalized within the legislative timeframes. We want to look at the Department of Transport and Public Works. As we know, it is also the Department of Mobility and the Department of Infrastructure moving forward. But for the period under review, one can see that at about almost just over 1.5 million vehicles stopped and checked to ensure compliance with traffic regulations, and then close to 10,000 traffic law enforcement operations conducted to reduce road crash facilities. And then one look at the work opportunities that have been created, and one look at both the infrastructure side and also the mobility side. Then one can see about just close to 1.3 work opportunities created by Provincial Public Works, and then around 3,000 work opportunities created by Provincial Transport for Individuals through the EPWP, with the intent of increasing farming production, and that is also in line with our work opportunities. And then in terms of research and development, which agriculture is also quite strong on, then one can see that 22 research development information packs were developed. And then further on in agriculture, about 455 agri workers, their families and rural community members assisted. And then close to 4,000 households supported with agriculture food production initiatives, another food security initiative. Thank you. And then one look at economic development, and then one see at the there is about 8.5 million leverage in support of the SME, and 139 tourists established, individuals supported. And then if one look at sports and culture, 709 existing after school practitioners trained. Going forward with the details, 181 mod centers and local government, 5 municipalities were supported in developing disaster risk reduction measures. Then just looking at 2 entities, there's about R500 million contribution to the Western Cape by investment in the investments zone. So when the liquor license, 98% of the automatic renewal matters by liquor licensing and tribunal finalize. And that was about 95%. Thank you. My apology if I didn't read too fluently. The green was actually just affecting my eyes. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We really do appreciate it. I'll thus now open for questions and answers. And just a reminder, members, this is the presentation for the previous quarter, not the current quarter. Okay, I'll take hands now. Member Murray, any other hands? Going once, going twice. Member Murray, you're up. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, my first question is, in terms of the average annual performance for particularly governance departments like finance and .P, what were the key factors that contributed to them having such a high performance, and whether there were any lessons learned that could be applied to other departments in future? I also wanted to understand, in terms of provincial expenditure, whether all departments, no, let me rephrase this. In terms of provincial expenditure, if we could just explain again how the additional authorized expenditure for education worked. I didn't quite understand that. And then what steps were being taken, particularly to assist human settlements and I believe health as well, with their underspending. I do understand that headcount is a particularly important focus for the department. I understand tender processing to be one of the issues as well. And if there is any mitigation or any assistance that could be provided by PT, I would be interested to know. And then just more broadly, in terms of PT, what is kind of the strategic focus on headcount? What is being prioritized and what isn't being prioritized? I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member America.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, on the second or third slide, or the fourth slide, where we have broadly the socioeconomic picture, job safety and well-being, the context is created there. It is stated that 40 outcome indicators were identified and measured. I didn't get a sense of the percentage of those outcomes that were achieved that resulted into the conclusion or the three categories, if I want to put it that way, whereby one could make the determination that this is how we have fared within that category. The question is perhaps if one look at the 40 outcomes or the indicators that are being measured to determine how we fared as far as job safety and well-being, what percentage of those outcomes were achieved? And then furthermore, Chairperson, if I look at, and Member Murray has touched on it, the percentage spent at human settlements of 91%, and it is stated that, you know, the reasons why those percentages were, you know, the way it is. If one look at the performance of the department in relation to the percentages that were spent, I just need to be sort of convinced that having spent 91% of your budget, and you have not achieved 91% as a performance sort of measure in terms of your outcomes. Nothing was stated about the Department of the provincial department also had a significant, compared to the norm, under expenditure. They also have an expenditure of 91%. And if one contextualize that with the reduction in COE, they have just reduced the headcount by one. What could be, the reasons why they, achieved the 91% spend for the financial year, and nothing was mentioned about that. Furthermore, Chairperson, if you look at the total reduction in, generally speaking, in many departments of the headcount. Now, I would like to know whether where those reductions occurred, and I understand and I accept that it cannot be just a blanket assumption, is that other than the Department of Health, where non-contractual positions post-COVID were not filled, were many of those other reductions in those different departments. And here one could also just mention DST with regard to the movement of social workers. Were they largely as a result of natural attrition, or were they deliberate in terms of reducing the headcount to stay within the norm? And then lastly, Chairperson, if one look at the projections in terms of the pressures at the various service delivery points, and the pressures departments face with regard to keeping their COE within the budgetary framework, and particularly in education, one see the delivery of new infrastructure that would require a expansion in headcount. Do we foresee within the current financial year a substantial increase in headcount, and how is it going to impact on the budget given the fact that they have spent almost 100% of the budget? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other hands, so I'll just pose my question then. My question is similar to one of the questions that members Murray and America asked. Now, I do understand to some point the reason regarding the community unrest and blocking of projects in human settlements. But colleagues, the human settlements budget and in the quarterly performance, we do see a trend now where it is one of the departments that is underspending. On one of the slides, it was also mentioned that 215 million rand was sent back by municipalities from previous years. So first, I just need a bit of clarity on, is that separate from the 212 million rand from the grant that is underspent but approved for rollover? And I'm appreciative of the fact that it was approved for rollover. But if I can just get some information on that money that was sent back from municipalities and which municipalities they were. But, one cannot necessarily compare human settlements to maybe health, education, or social development, who, ironically enough, all got over 99% expenditure for the past financial year. But you can perhaps compare it to public works. And public works on your slides also had a 99%, and that was when it was transport, and public works also had an above 99% expenditure for the past financial year. And when we look at, I think it's slide 10 that had the graph on it with the percentages, all of the departments more or less was between 96 and 99 or above even 99% expenditure. And it was only provincial parliament and human settlements. So we need to now ask, what are the rules or conditions that provincial treasury is going to implement to ensure that we get those departments to increase its expenditure? Because when you now look at the provincial average at now 93, it is those two departments that's bringing us down to 93%. Because every other department is above 96, and my understanding of good governance average is 95 and above. So everyone else is getting to their target. What are we going to do to help those other two to at least get to 95? Thank you so much. HOD, you can allocate the respective questions. I'm not sure if Ms. Pick or Ms. Ishmael wants to go first.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me take some of them, and then I will certainly ask both Ms. Pick and Ms. Ishmael to assist. Honourable Murray asked why are there a sort of relatively high performance in some of the administrative centre departments versus some of the frontline departments. I think that's largely because the sort of indicators that are in play in the non-financial sense. There are departments like the Provincial Treasury have standard administrative processes that happen on an annual cycle, and that's what's measured in our APPs. The departments of education, health, and so forth are very exposed to exogenous factors. And while they try and limit exposure through smart indicators, that's not always possible to do. So that I think is a big explanatory factor. She also asked what assistance to departments of health and human settlements in areas like, for example, supply chain management. We have briefed the committee before on integrated supply chain management strategy, which has got 4 elements. One, and that's the kind of digitization, governance strengthening, capacity enhancement, and so forth. We also do provide just-in-time support on specific issues and as and when it's required, not just to these departments, but to all departments at different stages as they go through their procurements. But really strengthening expenditures on goods and services, there's no one silver bullet. It's around getting the core governance frameworks in place and making sure that there are the right skills and that the annual cycle around planning, executing, managing, monitoring, and evaluating your supply chain system are in place. And we have various fora and interventions that support departments in that respect. So we certainly do obviously take all of this information and more and develop kind of bespoke relationships with departments from the Provincial Treasury side to support where it's appropriate to do so. That being said, some of the disruptions in supply chains are due to exogenous variables. It's got nothing to do with the efficacy, the efficiency at which departments are operating their supply chains, but they're external factors that inevitably affect them, because this is a big supply chain that we're dealing with when you look across the province as a whole. When it comes to the question of headcount, Member Murray asked, what is our strategic focus? Our strategic focus is on long-term sustainability, fiscal sustainability, that we don't commit over the long term to more spending on compensation that we can afford, and that we balance that with the sustainability of our services, particularly basic frontline services, teachers in classrooms, social workers working with vulnerable families, children, communities, and of course our health workers. And that'll always, I think, be a priority for the Western Cape, and that's where the bulk of our employment, the vast bulk of our employment happens anyway. In terms of our strategy has always been to make sure that individual votes respond to the service delivery dynamics through their own personnel strategies, and that they manage them quantitatively and strategically over time. We impose upper limits in compensation spending in every year to make sure that there is a ceiling and that it is always contained, so it doesn't run out of control in year or over a medium-term cycle. But we do work with and take a lead from departments in making sure they respond to their service delivery conditions and the dynamics of their workforces, which will have very different age and gender profiles, for instance, changing skills needs and the like. Increasingly, our strategy is over the medium term is to say, let's make sure that we are not just sort of imposing blunt quantitative limits, but that individual departments in their strategies are looking at the effects of digitization on service delivery and the skill sets and headcount requirements that may change because of that, that they're looking at issues of organizational culture, that they're looking at issues of performance management effectively, and importantly, that they are evolving their own service delivery models in ways that are appropriate to their sectors and the sort of partnerships that are possible in making sure that we maximize service delivery to communities. Member America had asked there in terms of headcount reductions. There is our big employing departments do face, of course, relatively high nominal rates of churn. That sort of attrition where people will leave posts for higher paid posts elsewhere. In many cases, for example, social workers are more highly paid in the municipal sphere than they are in the provincial sphere. And so we do see some migration. It sometimes feels, I think, for departments like they're running fast in recruitment just to stand still, and then if there is a risk to them breaching upper limits, they will obviously slow their hiring down to avoid that which may be just in delays in filling posts that are ultimately filled as well. But the province has, and Member America, you'll remember, in the current medium-term expenditure framework, there has been significant additional funding provided for both social worker and educator posts in our system. So that's real significant expansion, and that's responding to expansion in service delivery demands in those sectors. The one place that hasn't been able to happen because of the adjustment post-COVID is in the health sector, which puts them in a very constrained position that we share their concerns about as we make this adjustment, and are watching closely in terms of what other measures might be required for the sector. If I can just then on, I think I will ask Ms. Pick to deal with the education expenditure question from Honourable Murray. Ms. Ismail to deal with the PSP outcome indicators, and then in terms of the departmental performance, financial versus non-financial performance, I would caution the committee against jumping to any easy conclusions on why there is the variance, that why you may see a variance between levels of financial and non-financial performance. There are a couple of dynamics that are at play there. Often it can do with the indicators, measurable indicators that are selected in a sector relative to the stickiness of the expenditure, for example, on compensation that they might face. So that if you have relatively high proportion of expenditure in a vote on compensation, that will happen anyway, regardless of performance or non-performance on particular targets as well. So there's never going to be a sort of one-to-one relationship, and there will be a variance between different votes. We do, and this is Chairperson, to your question, what do we do to support departments with managing their expenditure levels? Our experience in the Western Cape is that there's not a silver bullet. It's about rigorous enforcement of processes and particularly planning for expenditures over time. I think the Department of Human Settlements has faced some disruptions, significant disruptions in particular project sites that have really slowed it up as well, but they would be able to provide significantly more detail on that. We will work with the departments on their budget practices, on their supply chain management planning practices, and on their governance frameworks through the year, and support them where we can to improve that. I will then hand over to Ms. Pick first, and perhaps Annalise, if you can provide further information on the surrenders versus the rollovers in human settlements as well. It's the education question, and then Ms. Ismail on the PSP.
Yes, thank you, David. If I could just get some clarity on or a repeat on the question on the education from Member Murray.
That was regarding the additional authorized expenditure for education. So under the slide with the authorized over expenditure, there were two paragraphs, and one of it was education and the head count and so on. Thanks.
Yes, all right. So, yes, so coming to the education question, and I indicated that education overspent in terms of on the compensation of employees on that expenditure item. And the driver behind that expenditure item is a combination of the increased of number of posts that they did increase, and I indicated how many teachers they've increased by in 1 year, 1,418, as I mentioned. So that's one of the reasons for the increase. And then also in terms of the calculation then, because they were given enough funding for the ICS requirements in the adjustments budget, but they also saw then that there's that they were spending less on, for example, on transfer payments and other item. And so what they decided was that they were going to be, because that was the driver, you can see from an infrastructure perspective, I mean, 8 additional schools, but they also, and I forgot to mention this, for education is the fact that you would notice that they spent 100% of their budget, which is quite significant because there was a very big increase from year on year on the infrastructure budget, so that the infrastructure budget increased almost like 800 million from the previous year to the current year in which we are speaking about. So, and therefore you also saw on the performance information that there was additional 8 schools that was built in one financial year. So as they were meeting their targets on the infrastructure side, they also then decided in terms of that they will keep on in order in terms of filling the teacher posts, but also in terms of going a bit more than what they budgeted for in this financial year for the teachers. But I mean, that does not mean, as I indicated before, we need to understand what they then did was that they saw that there was money left on transfer payments, and therefore that underspending then negates the over expenditure on COE. So there's no additional authorized funding that needed to be given for them, because in their overall budget, they then stayed within their overall budget. It's just between economic classification that they then, that there's underspending on one economic classification and transfer payments and over expenditure on COE. And the reason for the COE over expenditure is a driving their strategy in terms of to increase their posts as much as they could from their overall budget to be in line also and try to get ahead of the infrastructure targets that they were meeting during the year for education. So there's no additional authorized expenditure or budget or anything like that given to education. It's just within the economic classification that they found a balancing act, so to say. Then in terms of the human settlements, I think the chair asked the question. Yes, so there's 212 rollover of the underspending, and then over and above that, the revenue they received was in terms of revenue from numerous municipalities, but it's relating to previous underspending by municipalities on certain of the projects. And so I think Chair has also asked in terms of, do we have the breakdown of those municipalities? Not at the moment. I do not have the information with me right now, but we can provide that to the committee in terms of what those municipalities were, or the breakdown of the 200 million over recovery of revenue. Zena?
Thank you.
Sorry, just Annelies, and that is distinct from the rollover. You're on mute.
Sorry, yes, apologies, yes. So yes, that's over and above the rollover. So as I mentioned, the rollover of 212 million in terms of that is in terms of the money they have as well. And then over and above that, they also then have an over recovery now of revenue of about 251 million, if I remember correctly, in terms of the returns from the various municipalities. So it's two different sets of numbers. It's not the same.
Thank you. Zenat?
Okay, thank you. In addition to what the HUDF said earlier in terms of the performance, perhaps I just want to highlight one or two additional points that, the planned performance is perhaps different or unique to different departments. Some departments may have, from a national perspective, they have prescribed indicators that they need to work on. Very much frontline departments have had a lot of dependency to the indicators. They have stakeholders that they are dependent on. So the nature of the activities to realize the indicators may also be different. From a governance perspective, also some departments, and I know I speak from the Department of the Premier perspective, we have a monthly, our planned performance are being executed through a monthly reporting system. But to improve also that performance across the departments, we also have quarter-on-quarter, we actually have performance dialogues with the departments. Thank you. In terms of the question on the PSIP or the outcome indicators, very interesting question, and we're currently busy with the end of term review, and the end of term review, together with this annual release that we have just published, will actually give an indication of an outcome indicator and to what extent the indicator has increased or decreased. So what is the shift that has been made over a period of time? So in terms of, did we make a difference? There is historical data trends, and also we can actually start looking at the future. Rather than the 40 outcome indicators that are specific targets and about achieving the target, then the analysis is more around the trends and what does the story tell us. And is crime shifting and unemployment? We saw that narrative there. I tried to demonstrate the quarter-on-quarter shift in unemployment. But our end of term report will give that. We'll try to depict that answer across the period, across the 5-year period. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'm going to open up the floor for follow-up questions now and or new questions. I see Member America's hand. If there are no other hands, then I'll go after Member America. Okay, I see the hands are popping up now. Member Murray, Member Brunkhuis, and then I'll go after Member Brunkhuis. Thank you so much, in that order.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'd like to start off with the last response. But before I do that, and I think that one should congratulate the many departments, the achievements that were presented to us today, notwithstanding the difficulties some may have, particularly human settlements, is quite remarkable, and that shouldn't disappear in the cloud by focusing on one particular department in particular. Ms. Ismail's concluding remarks with regard to presenting to us in the final analysis in terms of the trends that have developed over time and the shifts that it sort of represents. And I think that would be a very welcome presentation, because then it will provide us with a much clearer picture in terms of where we have made a difference and what difference we have made, and where we need to focus our concentration on more to improve the lives of our residents. So, Chairperson, the question that I have is a follow-up on with regard to those rollovers, and those rollovers were sort of agreed to already in human settlements. So, given the exogenous factors that the department faced with regard to the completion of some of the projects, whether there would, in Treasury's opinion, be a significant cost implication that need to be considered with regard to the completion of those projects which were not completed within the financial year. And if so, would it require then additional budget and adjustments that need to be made during this particular adjustment cycle? Because certainly, inflation has gone up, costs of materials have gone up, cost of labor has gone up. So there will be impact on the cost with regard to the completion of those projects. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Member Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my first question, I was just curious when it was mentioned that there was an increased expenditure in terms of cleaning services. If the department could just expand on this, compared to which period was there an increased need? What are the contributing factors to this? So perhaps rise in costs might be a factor, and is it much larger compared to previous periods? I don't really understand where the increased need for the service comes from, or the increased expenditure rather. And then in terms of increased revenue collection for health, what were the contributing factors to this? And if there are any lessons learned that can be applied to other departments? Also, in terms of, and lastly, expenditure for Westgrow, to what extent is this expenditure helping to address the previous AG findings? That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member Brancais.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon to everybody. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I would like to dwell on the health budget. And my question simply is, in the years ahead, does the department see any possible increases in the health budget? What is the forecast for the health budget of the Western Cape? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much. I see Member Branca has jumped us from performance and targets straight into the MTech and MTF period. Thank you so much. My follow-up, just firstly, I would like to agree with Member America that we do need to congratulate the departments for their achievements in the expenditure, especially with the 99.3% overall expenditure on the full Western Cape government budget, which is significant because I believe the national target is 98. So as a whole, the Western Cape government is performing above average. I do want to do a follow-up on the human settlements expenditure. It was mentioned, for example, that education is building its infrastructure, that it's significant because it's almost 100% expenditure, and this is despite the budget continuing with increases. But I also want to say the public works budget also had, and that was now before it was infrastructure, also had an almost 100% expenditure. And with all due respect, they also build buildings, and I do know that there are civil unrest and community unrest in those departments and communities and things blocking those particular budgets and all projects. And yet they are achieving an almost 100% expenditure. So if I can just understand, how did public works and education get it right? Because maybe if we can understand how public works and education got it right, then maybe that's where our answers for human settlements lie. And while I do know it is a completely different department now, I would hate to see in the new financial year that we will sit again at budget and see that the portion in human settlements under infrastructure is bringing the public works side of the budget down. How do we fix that? What are those lessons where other departments are also building things, where they're facing similar challenges in communities? How can we extract some of those lessons for human settlements? Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. We certainly welcome suggestions, and thank you also for recognizing the significant effort that the teams have put into building the integrated report. We certainly welcome the suggestions. As I said at the outset, we're on a reporting reform journey to make more useful information. So obviously you're key users of this information, and we want to really respond over time to all the suggestions that we get that makes it more useful, including introducing trend analysis and so forth. On the question Member America asked on the cost implications to delays, yes, of course, there are cost implications to delays. They will vary by project based on what stage they're in. There may be penalties from contract that we're liable for contractors and so forth. Given our fiscal situation, it's not always a question of adding additional funding. It will most likely just result in delays in the execution of projects, further projects, additional projects further down, further up the pipeline that just won't be able to go into execution as quickly as was originally intended. So it has like knock-on effects rather than necessarily just a additional funding requirement from the budget, not least because of the fiscal constraints we have, and that money is simply not there. We do, however, I think as the Treasury note the pressures that the department is under, but we also, they do have the underspending that can offset that somewhat over time. I will ask my colleagues to respond on the specifics of cleaning services, and I think a question that Member Murray asked on the health vote. We may still have to collect the specifics of that information to give you a clear response, and I know the team is trying to do that right now. On the question of Westgrow, big impact that we will, that is additional expenditure related to escrow outputs. The big inputs on the governance support side that we're making with Wesgro to address their some of the audit issues that they've been challenges they've been facing are not heavy expenditure items. That's around strengthening processes and systems in the organization, and we're confident that good progress is being made on that front, but it's not an immediate fiscal pressure per se. Member Brinkhuis, when it comes to the forecast for the health budget, the 23 medium-term expenditure framework does not see significant increases for the health budget, certainly not in real terms. And that is a significant expenditure pressure that we do understand in the system. And we're meeting with our health colleagues as early as this morning, discussing some of the very real life challenges that presents. And I know that Dr. Kluti from the Health Department briefed the Standing Committee, I think yesterday or the day before, on some of the India pressures that they're facing as well. And we are fully conscious of those. Questions on how the province addresses this are going forward will be a function of the budget process, and those decisions have not yet been made. But I can assure you that we are very aware and alert to the pressure that the department, and in fact the health sector as a whole across the country, is currently facing. On the question, Member Bartman, on Department of Human Settlements spending, again, I would say it would be very important to get the Standing Committee to have a more detailed discussion with the department on the dynamics of their project pipeline, rather than leap to any generic conclusions. Yes, there are standardized processes and governance frameworks that can be, and in most cases are adopted to improve project pipeline and portfolio management across the province, and there is lesson learning and sharing, and in fact that is one of the key reasons for the formation of the Department of Infrastructure as a center of excellence, in a way, in making sure that we are not only getting good at what we do now, but we're preparing to be better at it tomorrow. And I'm sure that the Department of the Human Settlements function, which is now embedded in the Department of Infrastructure, will most certainly benefit from that. But there are specific dynamics that are associated with the human settlements pipeline that are a little different and more complex than those associated with, say, for example, an education pipeline or a health infrastructure pipeline. And I think that the Department of Human Settlements would be best placed to get into the detail of that, not least as quite a lot of that is quite tightly regulated by the Housing Code, which governs expenditure in terms of the human settlements development grant, so that the rules can be somewhat different there as well. But let me ask Ms. Pick if she's got anything to add on all of those questions, and whether we have any further information at this point for the committee on cleaning services and so forth.
Thank you, David. So yes, on the cleaning services, I think one of the questions my member Murray was asking was in terms of compared to which period. So it was compared to the previous financial year. So when we're comparing year on year, there was quite an increase in cleaning services in the 22-23 financial year compared to 21-22. One of the main reasons is the driver behind the increased costs on services was the fact that in terms of at the sector level for the cleaning sector, the agreement on wages was one of the driving factors. So obviously what that would then actually mean then as a bargaining sector in terms of for the cleaning service industry, there was an agreement of a certain percentage of wages for the sector, which obviously then has a knock-on effect too in terms of the kind of contracts, cost of contracts that public works then has to enter. Now, sometimes the timing of the increase in the wage agreement and our budgeting and the provincial and national budget process is not aligned, because each of the sectors are having their own bargaining and for that matter. And remember, I'm speaking now from a bargaining perspective of outside of the public service bargaining. So I'm talking about the sector now as a cleaning services sector in the private sector. So, and we saw that also, if you remember, if we cast our minds back, we saw that also in the security sector, which then also has a knock-on effect in terms of the contracts and the pricing of contracts that we then have to then incur. And that would also then fall in for public works, for example. So that's the main reason in terms of the cleaning services. Then just in terms of, I don't necessarily have all the detail on the health and the on health's revenue in terms of their over collection, but I did indicate to you that when we did put the 22-23 budget together, we did not increase the revenue budget. At least, I mean, we kept it exactly as it was in terms of the previous financial year. And in the previous financial year, we reduced the budget because we were in COVID. And because we did not know in terms of how the health revenue would respond post-COVID, and so therefore it was almost kept flatlined the 2 financial years. What health has done is the fact that they have, in terms of since they've come out of COVID, number one, in terms of, and then dealing with the backlog in surgeries and so on, in terms of now coming out of COVID, what they have done is they have also put some work into making sure that, you know, all their systems in terms of the health information system, in terms of collecting information and being able to track previous patients in terms of payment. They made sure that they did work on that. And then also the road accident fund. They were having some issues in non-response from the road accident fund. And they also, if I remember, in terms of for us listening to them throughout the year, they were saying that they were putting some special measures or they needed to change the way they were communicating with the road accident fund. So I think that's the combination of all of those factors. Then you'll see then is that over collection that you see. From a very conservative and budget, you led to this over collection. Just to add on in terms of the human settlement, so part of it would become a part of the outcome of the human settlement now in terms of the underspending and what is actually happening at the various projects. I can indicate to the committee in terms of that there is, I mean, this is involving almost about 40 to 45 different projects that is impacted by this underspending. So one of the things is to make sure that we try to, yes, costs will increase, but in trying to make sure that there is almost in terms of no time lost for the department, that they can continue and drive these projects, is why we also in terms of work so vigorously on the rollover process and to get approval for that, because then that means that they can just continue spending on those projects, and therefore there's not necessarily a longer lag time, which will then increase in terms of prices from that matter. So we're trying to also reduce and do risk mitigation from that side. From the Treasury side, what is the Treasury doing? Our infrastructure department with National Treasury, we start our visits in terms of visiting. Then based on this information, we then start selecting different areas, geographical areas to visit, but also particularly certain projects that we are going to be visiting. And we have put some of these projects on our visits that's going to be happening near the end of August with the National Treasury. So that then we will feed into what we're learning from there on the ground. We then feed that into the current year's processes to influence the adjustments budget. So to make sure, therefore, that human settlements then does in terms of do the necessary action to make sure that not only do they accelerate the spending where these projects are concerned, but also they then in terms of what we are learning, how they then move that into the current year's budget as well from that perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, do you have any other questions? Member America? Okay, I see no other hands. Member America, you may go ahead.
Chairperson, I don't think that we have received an adequate sort of response with regard to the question you and I posed earlier with regard to the underspending of provincial parliament. So perhaps, you know, there could just simply be a sort of a response with regard to the provincial parliament will significantly underspend their budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. HOD, so that's also regarding the provincial parliament spending 91%, if I remember correctly. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Obviously, the provincial parliament is something of a special case. It's another arm of government entirely as the legislature, and we are cautious never to overstep the bounds of our authority as the Treasury with respect to the legislature. I think I'll just ask Annalise to talk to the dynamics that led to that underspending. But that would perhaps be necessary for something for the legislature to take up internally. Annalise, have you got any insights on the dynamics there?
Chair, as far as I do know, in terms of the provincial parliament, there is underspending in terms of some of their contractors. So the contracts that they currently have. That is some of the explanation given to us, and then also in terms of partly also from a COE perspective, that there has been some underspending. But as the HOT has indicated, we put provincial parliament as part of the expenditure, because that does make up the entire total spending as to align itself to the budget that we do table. But in terms of we do not have oversight over the provincial parliament per se. So we do therefore we do not highlight in terms of any of the expenditures from our side with regarding the provincial parliament.
Thank you so much.
I must also indicate, Chair, I mean, that does not mean that we do not have dialogue in terms of trying to assist in terms of, you know, to be as efficient and effective as possible. That the dialogue is there around in terms of how to assist from that perspective and from a governance perspective to give advice in terms of what we learn from our departments, and we're open to providing that advice to provincial parliament. But oversight, as in terms of the interrogation that we would have for the department, that's slightly different.
Thank you, Ms. Pick. And I think as a committee, perhaps what we need to do in those particular departments and or spheres, we need to ask that the respective committees in Parliament assist us with interrogation on those particular amounts. Colleagues, any other questions? I do see that we have a little bit of time still left. If none, then I wish to thank the department for assisting us, both the Department of the Premier and the Provincial Treasury, in the past quarter's financial and non-financial performance. And also just thank you for the detailed information in the online link that you also sent us. So if members also want some extra information, when you open the link that the department sent us, you will see quite an extensive breakdown on the respective departments and the entities and the respective performance. If you haven't gone through it yet, my advice is put it and print it or put it on your laptop as some bedtime reading for the weekend if you haven't gone through it already. You will also, for example, see in the different drop-down boxes where the departments and the entities have complied and not complied, so that when you go to your respective committee meetings, when you come to the annual reporting stage, you'll be able to really zoom into what particular line item, what particular drop-down box, what particular compliance item has not been completed. And I do ask members, please read it. I always say readers are leaders, especially in the Education Committee, because if it's one of the best tools you have in order to be able to interrogate these particular reports. But with that, HOD Savage, Ms. Ishmael, Ms. Pick, and all the other officials online, thank you so much for being with us. I know a Friday afternoon for the Budget Committee slot is not always ideal, but we always appreciate your hard work and your dedication to the Western Cape government. You may go about your daily work. You are dismissed from the committee. I just ask that the members please remain for the rest of the committee business. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Colleagues, we have one set of minutes that we need to adopt, and then I will go over to resolutions and actions on this presentation, as well as any other matters. Yes. Thank you. Oh, yes, and I do have one set of feedback from the minutes also that I need to give you guys. Yes, okay. This is the minutes of 2nd of June. You just check your attendance. Apologies there. Okay, go down. That was the briefing on e-governance and digital economy programs. And then that was our committee report, adoptions and resolutions. And we can just quickly stop there by resolutions because one of my feedback item is on one of the resolutions. So I did engage the Deputy Speaker regarding asking for assistance regarding engaging the Estonia Consulate and Embassy to organize an online engagement. I've sent her all of our research documentation and wrote an email in this regard. And the procedural officer did previously assist also in just making sure that we got that information to the Deputy Speaker's office. So she is assisting us at the moment in order to try and put that together for us. But if there's anything else in this regard, please do let me know. If there's any other suggestions over and above the research we've already done. We can go down. Okay, that's the end of that document. If I could get a mover for the minutes, if there are no edits. Member America.
Chairperson, I move that we adopt the minutes.
Thank you so much. If I could have a seconder. Going once. Thank you so much. The minutes are so adopted. I'll now move over to resolutions and actions. Are there any that members would like to pose? I have one if there are none from members. Okay, so I see Mr. Matthews has already put some of our items down. The list of municipalities linked to the over the 200 million. I think it's 212. Maybe just check the presentation, but it is over 200 million of recovery of revenue within the Human Settlements Department. I think what we might need to say is the previous Human Settlements Department and then just add the previous financial year. And then maybe in brackets, you can say the now Infrastructure Department. Okay. Are members happy with that?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair.
Okay. And then I would like to propose that with the 291% under expenditure reports that perhaps we should forward not only this presentation as well as the documentation in the link that refers to both the Provincial Parliament and the Human Settlements to their respective committees to look at as to the reasons for those. Provincial Parliament would go to POC and Human Settlements would go to Infrastructure. How do members feel about that?
Chairperson, I completely agree with that because that is something that I wanted to propose as well. Because we can't instruct them to interrogate it further, but if they have the information at hand, then it is incumbent upon them to interrogate that information and the department with regard to that under expenditure. But so therefore I agree completely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other resolutions that we would like to propose? I do think we should probably just also congratulate the Western Cape government on its 99.3% expenditure on its overall budget. It is quite significant. I know that I think the National Treasury recommends a 98% in terms of good governance. So as the Western Cape government, we are thus performing above average in terms of our expenditure. And I think that sometimes we forget the amount of work that goes into being able to achieve an almost 100% expenditure on one's budget.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other resolutions? Okay. Mr. Matthews, do we need, okay, let me just wait for you until you finish. You can always finish later. As long as the resolution is captured in the recording, you can always go back to the recording. Thank you so much. With that, colleagues, if there's nothing else, then with that, I will just conclude the meeting. We are concluding a little bit earlier than usual, which I'm sure we are all appreciative of. And I will thank you again for your robust engagement in the Budget Committee. As you all will know, we are collectively on a journey to make finance fun again. And I appreciate your cooperation in order to achieve that within the Budget Committee. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I see the sun is coming out. With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. For you too, and colleagues, have a wonderful day and weekend. All right.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Chair. You guys
Chairperson.
also go well.
Thank you,
Thank you.
members.
Siraj. Siraj.
Einde van deze meeting over?
Yes.
Wait 1 second.